2016 election. Analysts describing President Trump as spiking the football after reading Barr's letter.
There was no collusion with Russia, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There was no collusion with Russia. There was no obstruction, and none whatsoever. And it was a complete and total exoneration.
Not exactly. Mueller noted his probe could not conclude that the president obstructed justice, but fails to exonerate him either. Barr in his letter interpreting Mueller's report as an indication the evidence cleared the president of obstruction of justice. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler concerned about a cover-up.
I intend to fight for that transparency. We will ask the Attorney General to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. We will demand the release of the full report. The American people are entitled to a full accounting of the president's misconduct referenced by the special counsel.
Republicans saying let's move on, but not just yet. There are federal investigations in New York, Virginia, and D.C., and probes of the Trumps in Manhattan and New York State. In front of one of Donald Trump's Manhattan properties, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand announcing in a speech that she is running for president, challenging the commander-in-chief.
It is not often that I agree with Richard Nixon. But he was right to say that the American people have a right to know whether their president is a crook.
This is Fox News.
Always here to help you. This island is our home. Through the years we've been a friend to the neighbors we have known. Now we're banking on the future. Services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Plant-friendly burgers at Chili's. Indulge in a selection of our famous burgers with a black bean patty. Black bean patties combine beans with onions, parsley, bell peppers, and cilantro. Served with dill pickles and fries. More Latin entrees include the spicy shrimp tacos, Cajun pasta with shrimp, or grilled ancho salmon. Best of all, each entree is just $15 and comes with a refreshing Coca-Cola, iced tea, or Heineken on draft. Our fresh house salad with an entree for just $15. Chili's 3 for Me Let menu. Available for a limited time. Chili's. More life happens here.
A note making a reference to the New Zealand massacre found at the scene of a possible arson fire early Sunday at a mosque in Southern California. Members of the Islamic Center of Escondido, about 30 miles north of downtown San Diego, managed to put out the blaze before firefighters arrived. Nobody was hurt. The exact contents of the note not disclosed. Police launching an arson and a hate crimes investigation. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is announcing what her country calls a Royal Commission of Inquiry, the highest form of investigation into that massacre of 50 people at 2 mosques in Christchurch. The inquiry will examine what role guns, social media, even spy agencies played in those attacks. Romania plans to move its embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and Honduras will open its diplomatic mission in the Holy City. Leaders from both countries made the announcements at AIPAC, the American-Israeli Political Action Conference in Washington. This as President Trump has invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House this week. This is just 2 weeks before Netanyahu stands for election. Residents of Australia's northwest coast bracing for a torrid night of fierce winds and heavy rains as the country's second major cyclone of the weekend slowly winds toward land. A day after Cyclone Trevor hit a remote part of the Northern Territory coast, slow-moving Cyclone Veronica settled just off the coast about 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles to the west in the Pilbara region of Western Australia state. In New York, I'm Jane Metzler, and this is Fox News.
Save big. Save really big when you bundle up your insurance policies with Nanbo Insurance. Insure your home, auto, motorcycle, or business with Nanbo and enjoy great savings, up to 50%. When it comes to insuring your property, no one knows better than the company with over 50 years of service to the community. Don't compromise the things that matter to you most. Call Nanbo today at 477-9754 or visit nanbo.com for more information. Nanbo Insurance, serving you since 1968.
Attention homeowners, if you don't have a solar energy system on your roof from Micronesia Renewable Energy, now is the time to get one. MRE solar energy systems now come with battery storage for zero money down. This means that your home will have power even when the island power isn't available, like during power outages or during and after storms. The inconvenience of not having power for your home is a thing of the past. Don't be left in the dark. Call 632-2613 for a free consultation. MRE, the smarter choice.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Second Amendment, United States Constitution. We spent a lot of time talking about the Second Amendment, the implications of the Second Amendment, its interpretation, the dyslexic appropriation, the dyslexic interpretation of it provided by Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia, those who would diminish it, those who would take it away from us, those who are the champions of the Second Amendment. But I may finally have come across the definitive word on the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. I have an article before me that I plucked from the online column called The Daily War, as you were the Daily War, the Daily Wire, and a foremost political authority on the United States Constitution and American government in general has spoken out. So here it is. Ocasio-Cortez calls for radical gun ban, champions confiscation. So if it's AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, then you know it's something that we really need to pay attention to, even though we may want to follow every one of her statements with a three-letter word spelled N-O-T, not. So here's what AOC says. Democratic Socialist Representative AOC called for banning all semi-automatic firearms Thursday night after championing New Zealand's radical new gun control measures, which includes government confiscation of nearly all semi-automatic firearms. The 29-year-old Congresswoman tweeted on Wednesday, quote, Sandy Hook happened 6 years ago, and we can't even get the Senate to hold a vote on the universal background checks. Christchurch happened, and within days, New Zealand acted to add weapons of war, to get weapons of war out of the consumer market. Included in that tweet was a video of Liberal New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announcing the new gun control laws. Here's what AOC said about that. This is what leadership looks like, she said. Ardern specifically stated in that speech that the government was going to be confiscating firearms from law-abiding citizens. Here's what Ardern said. In the meantime, we are asking all current holders of military-style semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles to visit www.police.gov.nz. They will find details of the weapons included in this ban. In the next 48 hours, a form will be available on this site that we are asking these gun owners to complete, identifying what banned guns they hold. Maybe we ought to copy that approach ourselves. To all people who have been accused of crimes, go to www.justice.com. There you will find a blank confession form, which you may fill out and send it in to your nearest police department. The police will then arrange for these weapons to be handed over and eventually destroyed. Details of the weapons handed back by owners that are covered by the ban will also be taken to ensure that fair and reasonable compensation is paid once the buyback is in place. If owners are unable to complete the online form, they are able to contact the police on the phone to arrange the handover of those now banned guns. As the legislation is developed, now that's what I kind of find interesting. The Prime Minister of New Zealand has just taken it upon herself to say, turn them in, fill out these forms, etc. And then she goes on to say, as the legislation is developed, we will determine the time available for return of military-style semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles and the duration of the buyback scheme. So apparently there's no law on the books in New Zealand that allows her to do this. I can assure people there will be time for the returns to be made and they will not be criminalized overnight. Well, that's comforting. After a reasonable period of time for returns, those who continue to possess these guns will be in contravention of the law. Currently, the penalties for this range from fines up to $4,000 and 3 years in prison. The draft legislation will look to increase these penalties. So I wonder if, here's my own aphorism here, Real Joe Cruz. I wonder if this aphorism fits. Is the Prime Minister of New Zealand using the old ready, fire, aim approach? On Thursday night, Ocasio-Cortez flat out called for banning all semi-automatic firearms, which include handguns, called for banning bump stocks and high-capacity magazines. Here's a quote. You know, instead of training children, teachers, houses of faith, and concert goers to prep for being shot, we could just pass universal background checks, disarm domestic abusers, mandate safe storage, bump stocks, semi-automatics, ban bump stocks, semi-autos, and high-cap mags designed to kill people. People with violent criminal records are already prohibited from owning and possessing firearms, and bump stocks have already been banned. The Hill's Buck Sexton, a columnist, noted, the problem with New Zealand mirroring the Australian approach to gun control is the Australian approach didn't work and wasn't needed. There are more guns in private hands in Australia now than before the 1996 ban, and gun violence went down for decades. So I suppose all of the talk about banning semi-automatic weapons, I'm not going to use this term assault rifles. I think it's too malleable. It tends to have a different meaning depending on who is using it. But I'm wondering if all this talk about banning semi-automatic weapons might create the so-called Barbra Streisand effect, that people who had no inclination to buy a gun are now saying, well, if they're going to do that, I better get out and buy one now while the getting's good. Anyhow, we've talked a lot about the Second Amendment. I've called on various scholars, some of our callers, some of our posters, guys like Ben Shapiro, etc., to come and I've quoted them. But finally, we've got someone who is credible in every corner of the country, if not every corner of the world. That would be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who just says ban them all. So much for the Second Amendment. From there, I think the real Joe Cruz is going to require that we go to Zemi Ikotny. Which is our backwards bilingual play on words translates into meet the press. Well, lately, meeting the press, when you look at our local newspapers, meeting the press has meant meet some stuff that was concocted in the editorial boardrooms at the WAPO or Gannett. And today probably is not much of an exception. The Daily News doesn't attribute this editorial to anyone, so you would think that it's homegrown. But I guess I shouldn't quibble too much because the first three words in this editorial are really a shocker coming from the Daily News. Here they are. Trump is correct. Oh, that's something you thought you'd never see. Now I got to read the rest of the sentence. Trump is correct on China's Huawei. So just that one little thing he's correct on. Everything else he's wrong as hell. But just that one little thing there, maybe he's correct. And then the editorial goes on to talk about this Chinese company called Huawei, security concerns, etc. That if you read the USA Today, you're quite familiar with, and that they've passed that off for their Monday morning editorial. I'm not even going to bother to consider what grade it should get because it doesn't meet my definition of an editorial in our local paper. I did some mining over the weekend, though, and I found some interesting stuff on the editorial page of the Daily News, some stuff that actually has a local dimension. Starting out, there was a Sunday forum, and the question in the Sunday forum was, what can the government do to increase transparency and access? And there's only one poster. Now, the Daily News itself, you might want to look at yesterday's Daily News and read the editorial position. It really blasted Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes and Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. And by the way, Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes is the Speaker of our legislature, correct? And Lou Leon Guerrero is our governor. Is there something you want me to know about those two people, Real Joe Cruz? What is it? I can't hear you, Real Joe. Is your mic broken? Okay, Real Joe Cruz says, we have lost contact with Real Joe Cruz. I know this is going to be a huge disappointment to everyone out there in our radio listening audience who are working hard and fast to establish the Real Joe Cruz cult of personality. No Real Joe Cruz today, huh? Okay, well, Real Joe Cruz, just to fill in the blank for you, Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes and Lou Leon Guerrero are females. Yeah, we didn't know that until the election, and then after the election, every day for weeks we were told, oh, Lou Leon Guerrero is the first female governor of Guam, and there are 10 female senators in the Guam legislature. Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes happens to be one of them. She's not the first female Speaker of the legislature.
One of 10.
She is, but she is one of the 10 females in the legislature. So you're back, aren't you?
Yeah. I think there was a button here that was depressed, so I had to press that.
Okay, well.
Figured it out.
It adds a whole different dimension to the show knowing that you're there, Real Joe Cruz.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sure your fan club here on the Facebook post will appreciate the fact that you have a voice. Okay, so in answering that question, here's what Tina Rose said. Reflecting on my inaugural address, I mentioned an old adage. Trust can take a lifetime to build and a minute to destroy. I went on to say that whatever it takes, how long it may require, Let us always be worthy of our public's trust. As elected officials in public service, I stand by that belief. Now, after having read into this a little bit, I suggested that when Tina does these things, what she needs to do is have an ophthalmologist handy to do a little editing for her, because she seems to have an eye problem. Right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah. The rest of her editorial talks a little bit about the Ethics Commission that the governor has finally appointed members to, but none of the rest of it touches on the question posed by the editorial. It's just all more self-serving, basically self-serving gibberish like the first two paragraphs that I read. So I was tempted to write in myself and answer that question. And my answer would be, if we want to have more transparency in our government, a really good place to start would be the legislature of Guam, because they are the legislature is a serial violator of the open government law. Now, before I tell you why I say that, I want to just mention a couple of things here. Get out your Law and Order notebooks. Yeah. The legislature is a co-equal branch with the other two branches of the government. And amongst the branches, there is this principle called comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, not comedy, C-O-M-E-D-Y. The legislature kind of monopolizes that one itself. But it shares comity with the other two branches, which means that one branch is not going to get into the business of the other branch unless it's absolutely unavoidable. We have a doctrine of separation of powers, which says that in the government of Guam, we have 3 separate branches of government, and each of those branches is co-equal. So putting all that stuff together, you reach this conclusion that even if a legislature blatantly violates its own rules in the passage of legislation, it's not going to affect the validity of the legislation, because it's said that a court is not going to look behind the 4 corners of an enrolled bill. In other words, when the speaker signs and the secretary attests that the bill passed, it has passed, and no court is going to go in and say, well, yeah, but when you did it, you violated the open government law, or all of the members weren't seated, or 3 of the members didn't have neckties on, or something like that. So that's important to remember. A second thing to remember is that in the Organic Act, there's something called the Speech and Debate Clause. And the Speech and Debate Clause, that no member of the legislature can be held for the things that he says in the legislature. Excuse me, I said he. What should I have said?
Probably they, sir.
Yeah. No single member of the legislature can be held responsible for what they said in the legislature, in any other tribunal. Speech and Debate Clause. And that Speech and Debate Clause is broader than just remarks made on the legislative floor during legislative session. So when it comes to the open government law, I think the chances of the Attorney General prosecuting a senator or some senators for violating the open government law is not going to happen. And if a suit were brought to invalidate a law because the law was passed in violation of the open government law, it wouldn't happen. But we do have provisions of the open government law that the legislature, a legislature, has applied to itself. So what do we do with them? Do we expect the legislature to comply with the laws that it has, in effect, enacted for itself? Yeah, we do. And we don't expect a lot of hypocrisy from people who, like Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, who say, oh, yeah, I'm 100% behind transparency. except when it comes to the legislature. Now, here's where the legislature falls down. At Title V of the Guam Code Annotated, you find Section 8104A3. The legislature is a public agency when it is holding a daily session, but meetings of political caucuses composed of members of the legislature are not required to be conducted in public. A committee, and subsection 4, a committee of the legislature is a public agency when it is holding a hearing. But committee meetings other than hearings are not required to be conducted in public. So what this means is that when the legislature holds a hearing on a bill like the one to legalize cannabis, it must post a notice. There has to be a 7-day notice and a 48-hour notice, just like any other government agency. And when the Rules Committee of the legislature meets, same thing, 7-day notice. And when the legislature meets, same thing, 7-day notice. How often does this happen? The usual method of proceeding is that, say on Monday, we'll read in the paper, well, the legislature's going to meet, the Rules Committee is going to meet on Thursday. Violation of the open government law. Rules Committee meets on Thursday and say, we're going to consider the following bills. Session will start on Monday. Violation of the open government law. 7-day notice, you guys. Read the laws that are applicable to the entire government, including you. So that's one of the most egregious violations that the legislature commits. They don't give notice of meetings of the Rules Committee and of the legislative sessions. Second egregious violation, I'm reading from the Organic Act. Organic Act 1423 requires the legislature to keep a journal. A journal is the same thing as the minutes of a meeting. It shows who was there, what happened, what motions were made, what motions passed, what motions didn't pass, what the votes were, etc. In other words, if you didn't go to a legislative session that was held 10 years ago today, you should be able to pull the journal for that session and know exactly what happened. That's the purpose of the journal. And here's another section, Section 1423I of the Organic Act. Every bill passed by the legislature shall, before it becomes a law, be entered upon the journal and presented to the governor. So in other words, the legislature passes a bill, there has to be a journal, and it has to say the cannabis bill passed by a vote of 8-7, and then you send the bill to the governor. Go on the legislature's website and take a look at the horrible job that they've done with the journals. There are arguably journals for the 32nd and the 34th Guam legislature, but they're woefully incomplete, and no other journals are there. There's no journal at all for the 35th, even though it's been in session how many times now? So the way it's supposed to work is the legislature goes into session on day 1, develops a journal. The legislature comes back in session on day 2, and one of the first items on the agenda is approval of the journal for day 1. And so on. So that journal should be completed almost in real time. The legislature doesn't do it. Too much work, too hard. And besides, if we did that, people could go back and see what we did and compare what we did then with what we're doing now. So I don't want to hear anything at all out of Tina Rose Munya Barnes about how the legislature is committed to transparency, because it just ain't. All right, second thing I found on the editorial page of the Daily News was a letter to the editor saying that the marijuana legislation is a waste of time. Too much valuable time and effort is being wasted discussing recreational and medical marijuana policy. This matter was decided already when simple possession was deemed a violation like a parking ticket. Those who want marijuana can get marijuana without risking jail time. Who needs laws promoting marijuana use? Medical and recreational users don't need new bureaus for vendor licensing, testing laboratory, tax collectors. Neither do clear-headed taxpayers. Parents, educators, medical professionals, law enforcement, and tourists don't want official endorsement of drug culture. Now that is key. Nobody, except maybe the smokers, want official endorsement of the drug culture. So what this writer is saying, you know, it's there already. If you really want it, you can get it. And the worst thing that can happen to you, if you get busted, you'll get a citation that might cost you $50. We don't need to bring all of the resources of the government to bear to enforce the drug culture. And I would add to that, which is illegal under federal law, which I'll get to on the card. So why are we going through this exercise? Okay, I'm going to come back after the break. A little bit of a surprise when you find out who the author of this letter is. The letter earns a lot of credibility just because of the way it's stated, but when you find out who the author is, the credibility increases dramatically.
Help celebrate Earth Month with 93.3 The Point and the return of the Upcycled Mascot Showdown. Stay tuned for details on the upcoming live event and how you can support your favorite school. The Upcycled Mascot Showdown, brought to you by Lolita Kamet from Remax Diamond Realty, the Agana Shopping Center, Sylvan Learning Center, PBS Guam, and 93.3 The Point.
Shrimp and guacamole for Lent at Subway. The all-new shrimp and guacamole combines generous portions of whole shrimp and a spread of guacamole served on freshly baked bread, paired with vegetables cut fresh daily in restaurants and sauces that are sure to excite your taste buds. Hurry in, it's only available for a limited time. Other fresh Lenten flavors include the classic tuna or the mouth-watering greatness of our seafood sensation. Don't forget the Veggie Max, a delicious and tasty vegetarian patty. Visit any of our convenient locations today. At Subway, you make it what you want.
And now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So going on here with this letter to the editor that appeared in the in the Daily News. So why are we going through this exercise? Who stands to profit from legal drugs? So far, the list includes senators, growers, sellers, government vendors, and appointment hopefuls. The administration waves rosy revenue projections like a psychedelic flag, signaling how many millions we as taxpayers will be ahead as public partner pushers. Guam leaders seek new laws we wanted passed when we were 15 years old. Who among our officials is older and wiser than that now? I get it. Recreational drugs relieve boredom and hopelessness. It's the poor man's pursuit of happiness, time out from life. But when did tickling yourself ever need a government stamp of approval? When we voted last November, we didn't vote for politicians who would build their careers on feel-good smoke dreams. We voted for candidates to tackle our challenges head-on. We need high-level appointees, the Attorney General, the Judiciary, and senators to sit down with each other and the public to solve chronic problems and seize opportunities, trash collection, maintenance of public roadways and parks, protection from criminals, modernization of government processes, and he goes on. He's got a long list of things there that we ought to be able to expect. And he says, should be their concern, not creating money-making opportunities for leaders. So when I read this letter at the end, I said, man, the way this guy lays out his case, he's factual, he's correct, he's very readable, he's interesting, he's got a little bit of a sense of humor there. This guy'd make a top-notch talk show host. You know who wrote the letter, Real Joe Cruz?
Me, sir. No?
Not even close, Real Joe.
Was it you?
No.
Who could it be?
It was Daryl Taggarty.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good job, Daryl. Yeah. You just read this and you say...
Yeah, I'm confused. I thought Daryl was for it.
Yeah, you could say, you read this and you could say, man, well, it's not whether you're for it or against it. It's how you make your case that counts, right? He really made his case here. So I said to myself, boy, this guy'd make a good talk show. And then I said, yeah, Daryl, of course. So we had another interesting letter to the editor from Diana Iglesias, who really went into the facts and laid out a very, very persuasive case as to her opposition to, as Daryl says, how did Daryl express it? The official endorsement of a drug culture. Yeah. And then there's one other thing here. This comes from this is from the opinion page on the Post, and it's the Post has some kind of a lash up with WAPO, so they run some of the WAPO's garbage once in a while. I usually read it just because, if for no other reason, for comedy relief. But like Rush Limbaugh often says, Real Joe Cruz, you know, I don't like to talk about myself very often, but then what does he say?
But this is about me.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is about me or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I get tired of this one too. America needs to treat white supremacists, as it were, white supremacism, as the killer it is. So the new boogeyman in town now is the white supremacist. So how do we spot the white supremacist? Well, here's your first clue. He's not a person of color. In this century of extreme identity politics, the first thing we must do is see what identity group a person fits into. And I've mentioned this before. I'm in one of the identity groups that you could say anything you want to them about this identity group, and no one would say that it's hate speech. And that would be white, straight males married to females. You could say anything you want to about people in that group. It's not hate speech. Everybody knows that. Now, on the other hand, just about anything that people in that identity group do say is hate speech. And this column about white supremacism is a pretty good example. Ideology is not constrained by geography, especially in the internet age. So it is unsurprising that white nationalism is less national than the name suggests. Notions of ethno-supremacy have always had their roots in transnational traditions of racism, and now online communities allow for actors in any state to draw inspiration from those in another. Well, this is usually the predicate to laying the blame for anything that happens with guns on Trump. That Trump has somehow, kind of like when Ray Tenorio got busted for the Glock party, he blamed it on Troy Torres. And for a while there, we could blame almost anything that happened on Troy Torres. Well, Donald Trump is Troy Torres writ large. So this editorial goes on to say, the Christchurch massacre is a case in point, allegedly carried out by an Australian in New Zealand in the image of a Norwegian and an American, not in the image of that guy named Hassan who shot up 13 soldiers at Fort Hood, Texas. Not like that at all. The shooting reveals serious shortcomings in how governments confront right-wing radicalism. In the United States, Islamist extremism, even if it is homegrown, is considered international terrorism, and law enforcement treats it that way. Right-wing radicalism, on the other hand, is called domestic terrorism, if it is called terrorism at all. Sometimes crimes motivated by the same set of values are classified as hate crimes or gang violence instead. Right-wing radicalism kills more Americans than Islamist extremism. Did you know that? Right-wing radicalism kills more Americans than Islamist extremism. You know, like that time that those right-wingers got a hold of a couple of commercial airlines and flew them into skyscrapers in, where was it, Peoria, Illinois, and killed a couple of thousand? No, I'm thinking, thinking of something else, I think. Yeah. Right-wing radicalism kills more Americans than Islamist extremism, and government should pursue the threat with more vigor. Doing so will require grappling with its domestic and global dimensions. The first step to fighting white supremacist extremism is to understand it. But that's not possible now because the Justice Department does not reliably collect the relevant information. Even hate crime reporting is voluntary and undercounted. A requirement for annual reports on all prosecutions of domestic terrorism and hate crimes with relevant details would go a long way towards assessing the problem. Now compare what I just read, that the Justice Department doesn't keep track of this stuff, right? And that's the first step. Go back and compare that with right-wing radicalism kills more Americans than Islamist extremism. Well, how do we know that?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's the whole thing, you know? That's the whole thing. So here's the grade that I'm going to give this opinion piece. Such tripe that the WAPO puts out. Okay, so still remember what Jim said, that sometimes he thinks I reach a little too hard to award a star. Well, I'm not going to do that today. Okay, then we've got the Post. Funding for autism care urgently needed. Okay, before I go into autism here, I'm going to pick up the phone and talk to Tom. Good afternoon, Mr. Tom.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Better than I deserve, Tom, but working on it.
Anyway, for people like myself who are not truly understanding who exactly are the left and who are the right, I think that when they talk about the lefties people, they're talking about the Democrats, right?
Almost 99% of the time, Tom. It didn't used to be that way, but the Democrat Party has drifted so far to the left that it's hard to find a Democrat who is not on the left.
But who decided on the rule that the Democrats will be considered lefties or the left? I mean, are they on the left side of Congress, on the congressional hall, or what?
That started back in the British House of Parliament, and if you can watch Parliament on TV nowadays, it's not anywhere near, their chamber is not anywhere near as elegant as ours. But there was a time when the Conservative Party was on the to the right of the aisle, and the Liberal or Labor Party was on the left, and I think they probably still follow that same seating convention. So that's where the terms came from.
Okay.
So right basically stands for conservative, left stands for, I'm going to be objective here, liberal, although I could use a couple of other words there. That's how it started, Tom.
But anyway, you know, in my opinion, they should just, instead of saying it's the lefties that did this or the radical right that did this, why don't they just say it's the domestic enemies of the Constitution? The Constitution has foreign and domestic enemies, you know. So also all of these terrorist groups or extremist people, either left or right in the United States, that are doing such violent acts, against the people. They're really against the Constitution.
Well, Tom, when you come to the hard left, they would wear your accusation that they're enemies of the Constitution. They would wear that like a badge, because they see the Constitution as getting in the way of all of the wonderful things they want to do. Right now, they want to abolish the Electoral College. They want 5 more justices on the Supreme Court. They want the Senate to be apportioned according to population. And, of course, there isn't any power that any of the states possesses that shouldn't be with the national government, according to them. So I think some of the lefties would wear enemy of the Constitution. They would have T-shirts made that say, "I'm an enemy of the Constitution," and pass them out at their rallies.
Yeah, and the Democrats also want 16-year-olds to vote. And even if they're not U.S. citizens, they want them to vote.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's just so stupid the way the Democrats are thinking nowadays. And what do you think about your friend Adam Schiff? He is not satisfied with the Mueller report.
No, I'm going to get to that a little later on. But, Adam Schiff was actually out here at one time. He came out here in a Codell. And I had the opportunity to chat with him, to shake and howdy with him. And I pointed out to him that one of my heroes, the longstanding district attorney on Law and Order, an actor named Stephen Hill's name on the program was, guess what? Adam Schiff. Yeah.
But why is Adam Schiff keep on saying that there's direct evidence of collusion, when it's been 2 years now and they still haven't proven that there is?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I ever mentioned this before, but Adam Schiff is a lawyer, and the old country lawyer used to say, when the law is against me, I pound on the facts. And when the facts are against me, I pound on the law. When the law and the facts are against me, I pound on the table. And that's what Adam Schiff is doing. He's pounding on the table.
Our friend Trey said that Adam Schiff is the saddest person in the United States of America. Well,
that's quite an accolade, but if anybody's a candidate, it should be Adam Schiff, yeah.
I'll let other people chime in, my friend. Nice to talk to you again.
Okay, thanks for calling, Tom.
Okay, bye.
So here's the post. Funding for autism care urgently needed. Well, the focus of a lot of discussions among senators in session in recent days included the supposed gambling rules for a carnival and the proposed legalization of marijuana for leisure. There was at least one other issue that begged for urgent attention but wasn't given priority. Now, Daryl Taggart didn't write this, but it's right in accordance with what Daryl says. We got important stuff to do, and you guys are horsing around with, celebration of the drug culture. Guam's lack of adequate services for children with autism spectrum disorder hasn't been an issue for years. And then the editorial goes on to talk about how the legislature gave $150,000 in seed money to an organization called Hunter Speaks Autism Organization. The funding is almost gone. The Autism Center is not up and running. And here's the call to action. The long-term goal is to have the proposed Guam Autism Center developed within the proposed one-stop building the Department of Integrated Services for Individuals with Disabilities is supposed to develop with a private sector partner. The proposed site is the prime government land adjacent to Kmart and a power substation. However, the proposed development of the DISIT building remains in limbo. Families on Guam who have children living with autism spectrum disorder need help from the government. Providing a funding mechanism for more therapists in general, not only specifically for Hunter Speak Center, would really help families. So that's the That's the Post. And were it not for the first sentence here, I would not... Well, I'm going to explain this when we come back from our break, leading up to that big halftime show that we have every day here on Tall Tales.
If you have family or friends getting treatment right now at St. Luke's Medical Center in the Philippines, we want to connect with you. Hafaday, I'm Joe Guam. Thanks to our partners, we're bringing Mes Tamoru to St. Luke's in Global City. I'll be playing a free show on March 29th from 2 to 4 p.m. in the St. Luke's Piano Lounge for all our Guamanians out there. All family members accompanying the patient are invited to join us, but seats are limited, so please tell your family to go to joeguam.com to register online and reserve your spot. This event is presented by Guam Windward Memorial. Special thanks to our affiliate partners, Stay Well Guam, Take Care Insurance, Guam Hearing Doctors, Lombard Health Eye Clinic, Guam Premier Outlets, and Coast 360. Our contributing partners, Moylan's Net Care and Data Management Resources. Our supporting partners, American Music, Fizz & Co., The Coconut Tree Company, Kadu Restaurant, and our promotional partner, The Point, Sidus Mossids, and Biba Mes Tamoru.
I'm proud to be a Guamanian where America's day begins. And I can't forget the women and men who fought for my brown skin.
Okay, so here we are back to the Post. And were it not for this paragraph, while the focus of a lot of discussions among senators in session today included the supposed gambling rules for the carnival and the proposed legalization of marijuana for leisure, there was at least one other issue that begged for urgent attention. Had it not been for that paragraph, I would not consider the Post as a candidate for the Blue Star, because the editorials are supposed to do more than state propositions that almost anyone agree with and that would cause tummies to be warm in the process. That's not what an editorial is for. And were it not for this paragraph, that's pretty much what this editorial would have said. But given that paragraph, Jim, I think this editorial barely crosses the line. Therefore, the Post received the coveted Blue Star. Of course, given the editorial in the Daily News, the competition was so weak that you guys over there at the Post, no champagne today. That was a pretty hollow victory. Okay, so we'll at least start on the card here before we break for that big halftime show that we all look forward to every day with the marching band, the drill team, the cheerleaders, the fire eaters, the synchronized card sections up in the grandstands. Are we going to have a flyover today?
Yes, definitely a flyover.
Yeah, I don't know if it's
Blue Angels or...
I think the Blue Angels are scheduled for a flyover today.
That should be sweet.
Okay. Okay, first, here's what I've got on the card. Mueller versus Trump. Yeah, not Mueller versus Trump. Mueller versus Trump. And perhaps subcase Mueller versus people who know how to pronounce his name. Then we've got more Menogate. This time it's Rory versus the Port Board, and it reflects back to my gazing in my crystal ball last Friday, if you remember that, Real Joe Cruz. And then I've got Clint versus Congress, which first came before us as Vanessa Oshiro versus Clint. And then I've got GPD versus Mark Chotfris, which is a pretty interesting one. So you're going to want to make sure that, I know everybody, during the big halftime break, a lot of folks, I know Dee always goes out and Lady Dee gets herself a bowl of popcorn. And she's usually equipped with Cracker Jacks for the seventh inning stretch. But just make sure that you're back in time so that when the halftime show is over, you don't miss out on anything here. So I'm going to start out with Mueller versus Trump. First of all, Robert Mueller's name is not Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller's name came from the German, And not surprisingly, it means Miller. Now, if you were to see it written in German, you would see M-U-L-L-E-R with an umlaut over the U. And umlaut is those two dots right over the U. Now, we don't know how to deal with the umlaut very well in English. The only use it has in English is, this is complicated, but it's occasionally used to show that when a letter follows itself, it is not a diphthong. So, for instance, you could spell coordinate, C-O-O-R-D-I-N-A-T-E, and put an umlaut over the second O to show you that it's coordinate, not coordinate. Anyhow, the umlaut in German changes the pronunciation of the letter over which it appears, and it makes a U into a U. So it's not Muller, it's Mueller. Sort of like someone who spent his days herding mules around a pasture might be called a Mueller. But for some reason, Robert apparently pronounces it Muller. Well, I can understand that. To mull something, I was mulling that over in my mind, and I came to a conclusion. Kind of makes you sound like a thinking person. But when you say, well, yeah, that's Mueller, Mule brings to mind concepts of stubbornness, maybe even Democrats, because a mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey, right? The donkey is the mascot of the Democrat Party. Anyhow, the proper pronunciation of that name is Mueller, not Mueller. So Mueller versus Trump. If you read the summary of the Mueller report put together by, you could read this, the Attorney General Barr put out a summary, and it's all over the internet. You read it, and you come to the conclusion that there wasn't any collusion, because the summary goes into how much money was spent, how many lawyers were involved, how much time was spent, etc., and there was no collusion. Now, with respect to the charge of obstruction of justice, according to the Attorney General Barr's summary, there is a summary of the facts that Mueller found, but Mueller doesn't say yes, it was, or no, it wasn't obstruction of justice. Now, you heard it here first. I'm going to say that given what we know about Comey being fired and the president, Donald Trump, there was no obstruction of justice there. Yeah, I just read a post that came up here. The Mueller report turned out to be the Mueller report. Well, it didn't Mueller Donald Trump, that's for sure. Okay. The president appoints the attorney general. The president of the United States can fire the attorney general for good reason, no reason, or even a bad reason. That's the way the Constitution sets it up. There was a time when Congress passed a statute called the Tenure of Office Act. And I'll come back to this just briefly after the halftime break, and then we'll go to we'll go back to Manogate.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The conclusion, no collusion. I'm Jane Metzler, Fox News. President Trump celebrating what Attorney General Bill Barr claims special counsel Robert Mueller determined after his 22-month investigation that neither President Trump nor members of his campaign conspired with Russia's efforts to sway the 2016 election. One Russian lawmaker said his country is happy to mend ties. The president saying,
"There was no collusion with Russia, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There was no collusion with Russia. There was no obstruction, and none whatsoever. And it was a complete and total exoneration."
Not exactly. Mueller noting his probe could not conclude that the president obstructed justice, and his report fails to exonerate the president either. Barr, in his review of Mueller's findings, calls the president cleared. Concerned about a cover-up, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler. He wants to call Attorney General Barr to testify.
The president or his people are saying it's a total exoneration. That contradicts what the special counsel found. It's a lie about what the special counsel found, but we should not be surprised that they lie anymore.
He also wants the full Mueller report released. Republicans say it is time to move on for the good of the country. That will not happen yet, with federal investigations underway in New York, Virginia, and D.C., and Manhattan's DA delving into the Trump's business affairs, along with New York's Attorney General. Facing his own corruption probe and an election in 2 weeks, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets with President Trump today at the White House. He is cutting his visit short after a rocket launch from Gaza struck a house in central Israel. 7 people injured. This is Fox News.
Shrimp and guacamole for Lent at Subway. The all-new shrimp and guacamole combines generous portions of whole shrimp and a spread of guacamole served on freshly baked bread, paired with vegetables cut fresh daily in restaurants and sauces that are sure to excite your taste buds. Hurry in, it's only available for a limited time. Other fresh Lenten flavors include the classic tuna or the mouth-watering greatness of our seafood sensation. Don't forget the Veggie Max, a delicious and tasty vegetarian patty. Visit any of our convenient locations today. At Subway, you make it what you want.
Laddie Stone Entertainment and the stations of Choice Broadcasting proudly present the Miss and Mrs. Curry Guam Pageant on Wednesday, April 3rd at the Sheraton Laguna Guam Resort. Tickets are $25 in advance and $35 at the door. VIP tickets are $50 in advance and $65 at the door. Tickets available at the High, Misa Zone, the Vault, and from any of the lovely curvy contestants. Doors open at 6 p.m. and the show starts at 7. Hosted by yours truly, Ryan the Mixologist, and the beautiful Liza Camacho. Special thanks to Pitbull Empire, Local Promos, Figure 8, One Punch Media, and the International Sports Center.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announcing what her country calls a royal commission of inquiry into the massacre of 50 people at 2 mosques in Christchurch.
While New Zealanders and Muslim communities around the world are both grieving and showing compassion for one another, they are also quite rightly asking questions on how this terror attack was able to happen here.
A letter referencing that New Zealand mosque attack found at the scene of a mosque fire near San Diego Sunday. Police in Escondido launching an arson and hate crime investigation. No one was hurt. A Catholic archbishop wants people to stop praying to this saint who ain't.
La Santa Muerte, which is depicted as a female skeleton dressed in a robe, is not an actual saint of the Roman Catholic Church. It's popular in Mexico and somehow made its way across the southern border into the U.S., worshipped among immigrant businesses, artists, and the poor. Santa Fe Archbishop John Wester has denounced it before and is now renewing his call, telling the Associated Press that the focus on death is counter to the Church's teachings.
Fox's Ken Duffy. Did your poll picks make the Sweet 16? These teams surviving 4 days of competition in the NCAA tourney. In the West,
1-seed Gonzaga meets 4-seed Florida State, and 2-seed Michigan squares off with 3-seed Texas Tech. The South region set for play in Louisville, with top seed Virginia battling 12-seed Oregon, and in the bottom half a 2-3 matchup between Tennessee and Purdue. Friday's action sees the Midwest region in Kansas City featuring top seed North Carolina facing 5-seed Auburn, and 2-seed Kentucky meeting 3-seed Houston. And the East region in Washington, D.C., top seed Duke will meet 4-seed Virginia Tech, and 2-seed Michigan State set to match up with the 3-seed LSU.
That's Ryan Mayer, and I'm Jane Metzler, and this is Fox News.
Here at APL, our core values give the company its heart and soul. Whether it's connecting your business with our global network through our newly enhanced service or investing our efforts into giving back to the community, APL is committed to serving you. We humbly honor the opportunity to find innovative solutions for you and your business. To learn more about our enhanced service, call 588-4651 or visit www.apl.com/Guam for more details.
Okay, I think it's coming up soon.
Yeah, we're on Route 1 and near the airport intersection, right?
There, see it? What's the keyword? Look for the keyword.
Check out the Vantage Digital Billboard and reap the rewards. Catch the keyword on the screen and get a free Americano or tea with menu purchase when you mention the keyword at your next visit to the Hive. Conditions may apply.
Did you see it?
You got it. I got it. You just focus on driving.
Take advantage today and take a look at Vantage Advertising's digital billboard located on Route 1 at the airport intersection.
What a great halftime show that was. And now one treat follows another. We'll now listen to the Real Joe Cruz opine about aphorisms.
Oh, outstanding.
What is an aphorism, Real Joe Cruz?
Well, an aphorism, it's a short, pointed sentence that expresses a wise or clever observation or general truth.
Well, can you give me an example?
An example would be the nicest thing about the future is that it always starts tomorrow.
Okay. Well, you know, lawyers deal a lot with what lay people call the fine print.
Mm.
You know, that 4-point type that's really hard to read without a magnifying glass, where all the zingers are found. What can you tell me about fine print?
Be careful about reading the fine print. There's no way you're going to like it.
Okay.
Is that why they always say the devil's in the details?
I think so, yeah. The devil's can make himself so small that you can't see him down there in the fine print. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about automobiles.
Sure, I'm a car guy.
You're a car guy. What kind of seats does you have in the front of your car? Really?
Bucket seats.
You have bucket seats. Well,
yeah.
Does everybody like bucket seats?
Not necessarily. You know, the trouble with bucket seats is that not everybody has the same size bucket.
Okay. Well, I want to talk for a second about tattoos, Real Joe Cruz.
Oh, yeah. Good decisions, bad decisions, maybe.
Well, I'll confess. I have one.
Whoa.
I got one. I've had it for, well, how long has it been? 62 years, yeah.
Does it say Tall Tales?
It says USMC.
Oh, okay.
And I have a rule about tattoos. If it doesn't say USMC or mother, you got no business having it on your arm.
Okay.
Those are the only two exceptions. But what can you tell me about tattoos?
I don't know if people realize, but in about 40 years, we'll have thousands of old ladies running around with tattoos.
That'll be a beautiful sight, won't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, just one more here, and then we'll go on to
sure,
welcoming people back, Real Joe Cruz. So you've heard the old thing about you can't buy happiness. Is that true?
Well, money can't buy happiness, but somehow it's more comfortable to cry in a Jaguar than in a Ford.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, that's the real Joe Cruz. It's he's given the opportunity to demonstrate his intellectual capabilities from time to time. You'll recall when I had that list of really hard questions that he polished off with great aplomb.
Thank you, sir. I'm here all week.
Yeah, he did his. He was a great. He put on a great performance as a thespian when he did his Yogi Berra imitations, and now it's aphorisms. Okay, so I was talking. Well, let me see. Let me welcome back the folks here.
Welcome back.
So we had Margaret Bross, who says she's glad to be informed that I'm on the air. And Margaret, I think you're watching from Cypress, California. It just goes to show you the loyalty of our international radio listening audience. I suspect that folks all over the world, as they check into luxury hotels, the first question they lay on the desk clerk is, can I get on Facebook here in time to watch Tall Tales? And I've got James Howard, who says, Pine Gap getting hit. Pine Gap getting hit. I don't know. I gotta think on that one a little bit. I'm not quite sure I get it, and I feel bad that I don't. Looks like the kind of thing that I'd really like if I understood it. Ishmael Velez. POTUS has not colluded with the Russians, but he's still in a hurry to hunt down Hildebeest. Yeah, and that's the ironic thing about the Mueller investigation. You know, we know so much about what Hillary did with her dossier and the fraud on the FISA court and the Strzok and the girl and the FBI, et cetera. And Hillary's independent email server, and on and on and on. Not a word. And we've got Ishmael Velez. Again, if it's AOC, then it's not AOK. You got that one right. And once again, or should say, was a weapon of war. He says, I got ahead of myself. Ishmael Velez says, as a veteran, I am a weapon of war. My rifle is just a tool. Talking about AOC's comment. As a veteran, I am a weapon of war. My rifle is just a tool. And then his next post he says, I should say, was a weapon of war. Now I'm just old. Happens to the best of us, Ishmael. And then Chris Abalencia puts out a couple words that I'm not familiar with, and I don't think I'm going to say them until I am. Anybody can help me with those two words? I'd really appreciate the help. Ishmael Velez talks in terms of girl power. I guess that was in response to some of the tips that I passed along to the female speaker of the Guam legislature. And then we've got Shelley Gibson. Hey, Mr. Klitzkie, talking about lightweights? Okay, I guess I was. And then Shelley says, not all girls. And then James Howard, I think, commenting on my conversation with Tom about who's on the left and who's on the right. James Howard said, I'm in the middle, close to the heart. Okay. Richard V. Leone, the local Democrats and GOP teach muteness. They're all related. You started another confusion. Okay. Joe Cruz, the Mueller report turned out to be the Mueller report. That's good. But that's not you. That's another Joe Cruz. Okay. And then Jose Martinez, as you were. Jose Martinez, I'm hearing Ben Stein repeating Mueller? Mueller? Okay. James Howard, Dr. Akimoto just said wheat is good for Guam. Well, with an authority like that, I guess the only thing we're waiting for is for AOC to come out and say what the actual approach ought to be. Jose Martinez, how many Russians did it take to make Hillary Clinton lose an election? Do you know the answer, Real Joe Cruz?
None?
Exactly. And then Ishmael comes back, imaginary Russians. She must be on cannabis. Okay, and then I've got a clarification here. Pine Gap is the eats and ears of the NSA, NRO, CIA, etc. in Australia that's getting hit by the storms. Well, I'm still requiring a little research on my part. Okay, then I've got Gabby LG, who just wants us to know that he's here, or maybe it's she's here. I guess what I have to say is this. Gabby LG wants us to know that they are here. James Howard, Pine Gap is the eats and ears of the NSA, NRO, CIA, etc. in Australia that's getting hit by storms. Okay, well, that's the welcome back portion of the program. So where did I leave off with Mueller versus Trump? I guess I was talking a little bit about the Attorney General Barr's summary. He said there was no collusion. He said he's not I remember. He said he's not going to, he set out facts on the obstruction of justice matter concerning President Trump. That is, he set out facts leading to a yes and a no or a no answer on the question, did President Trump commit obstruction of justice? And I will rule right now that it's very difficult to convict or to make a case against the president on obstruction of justice when he's acting as the president. Now, if the president of the United States got a ticket for speeding, say, on the New York Thruway, and he attempted to bribe the trooper that gave him the ticket, that might be obstruction of justice. But if the president of the United States fires the director of the FBI, I don't think that's obstruction of justice. As the president of the United States has the ability to point just about whoever he wants for these positions, and he can fire for good reason, bad reason, or no reason at all. And I was talking about a statute that Congress enacted after the Civil War called the Tenure of Office Act. And Congress said, in the Tenure of Office Act, said that any appointee by the President of the United States who is confirmed by the Senate cannot be fired without Senate concurrence. This was all part of the battle that we now loosely refer to as Reconstruction. Harsh Reconstruction, easy Reconstruction, etc. Well, President Johnson had a member of his cabinet that didn't follow the dictates of the president, so President Johnson fired him. And for that reason, the House of Representatives impeached President Johnson. When Johnson went to trial before the Senate, he was found not guilty, but he was actually impeached for firing someone in his cabinet. Now, in those days, it was much harder. It was much easier to get impeached than it is nowadays. Now you have to grab a White House intern and hustle her off to the cloakroom in the Oval Office and do bad things to her to get impeached. Back in those days, it was much easier. All you had to do was disobey a law of Congress. But that case later on came before the courts, and the Supreme Court ruled no, the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional. You can't fetter the president in the carrying out of his executive duties. So if the president says to somebody, I'm firing James Comey as the director of FBI because I don't like what he's doing with that Russia investigation, not obstruction of justice. You heard it here on Tall Tales. Now, will the Democrats let that go? I think Tom earlier in the program said, why is Adam Schiff still wrestling with the collusion thing? And the answer is that the Democrats are not going to let this go. If they could find out about Donald Trump getting a ticket for speeding on the New York Thruway, they'd make that into an issue. And I think you could easily conclude that all of this is really about the fact that Donald Trump was not supposed to win the election in 2016. It was supposed to be a Democrat. Not the best Democrat in the eyes of many of them, but at least Hillary is a Democrat. I think she'd already picked out the color of the drapes in her bedroom in the White House. And only one thing kind of screwed her up. That is a Trump beater. And since that time, the Democrats have concentrated most of their efforts in trying to nullify that election of 2016. And we're going to see a lot more of it. We're going to see the Mueller report, efforts to subpoena the Mueller report. And if somewhere in the Mueller report there's language that said that at a state function with other heads of state present, the President of the United States actually belched and neglected to say, excuse me, the Democrats will make a big deal out of that. You could just bet on it. Okay, so we don't spend a lot of time on national politics here, preferring to spend most of our time on local politics. So turning to the card, I've got, we're still here on Menogate. Rather complicated. You'll remember that Bernadette Meno was fired for allegedly trying to proceed on a false claim of a work-related injury. Meno and 6 other people were fired in the process. The low 7 are referred to as the Port 7. The governor's office found out that Meno was going to be given an extremely high rate of per diem and extra time to go to Hawaii for her surgery, causing the board at the port to look into the matter. An investigation conducted by the board's attorney, Mike Phillips, turned up that all seven had committed acts that would be indictable felonies. Mary Torres, when she refused to fire Meno, was fired herself. The Port 7 cases have been up and down from the Superior Court to the Civil Service Commission, etc., and there has not been a complete resolution of any of them. Now, Rory Respicio early on attempted to get involved because very early on, an assistant attorney general named Wells Nelson Warner began an investigation of the Port 7, and in the process of his investigation, he wrote to the director of the Civil Service Commission asking that none of the documents furnished to the commission by the port be released because this would make it more difficult for Warner to conduct his investigation. The day after Warner's letter became public, Rory Respicio wrote a letter to the Attorney General accusing Warner of prosecutorial misconduct. The next day, the Attorney General at that time, Lenny Rapanis, wrote to the director of the Civil Service Commission saying, I'm withdrawing Warner's letter, disregard it. Thereafter, Werner left the island. We don't know why he left, if he left in a huff or what, but anyhow, he's gone. He doesn't remember the details of why the prosecution was stopped. He does remember that the prosecution was begun. So that's the first time Rory gets involved with the Port 7. As the cases go up and down through the legal system, which I posit is the way we're supposed to do things in a place where we are governed by laws and not men. Decisions, we have legal procedures, and legal procedures should be allowed to run their course, especially in the case of hotly contested cases. No single person should step in and say, well, I'm going to short-circuit the process because I don't think it's going to reach the right result, and I know what the right result is, and I'm going to cause it to happen. Well, that's exactly what Rory Respicio did at his first meeting with the board of the commercial port after Rory had been appointed to be the executive manager of the port. He came before the board and he said, I'm setting up a group to examine the terminations of the seven to make sure. I don't think it was fair. I want these people to be treated fairly. One of the board members said, you ought to resign. This is not the kind of stuff that you do on your own. This requires board action. It kind of died down after that. That board member's term expired. Somebody else was appointed. It kind of died down after that. The next thing that happened was that the chairman of the board during the time that these things were happening, Danny Tydenko, was appointed to the airport board of directors. And when Danny came before the legislature for his confirmation hearing, Bernadette Mano and a couple of others came down and testified against him, no surprise. And after all the testimony was taken, Mary Torres, a member of the committee, said she could not in good conscience stand by for the confirmation of Danny Tydenko. He was not a good person. He'd conducted meetings in violation of the open government law, etc. Danny was the chairman of the board that fired Mary. Danny didn't have a chance to rebut, but he sent in a sheath of papers, including a transcript of the executive session of the board where this matter was discussed, and several other documents, including Mike Phillips' findings of fact and conclusions of law. All of it very persuasive. This prompted Mary Torres then to submit her documents. The only thing in Mary Torres' document that I thought was noteworthy was her accusation that the board under Tydenko had conducted several meetings in violation of the open government law. The rest of it, to me, kind of read like, I don't like Danny Tydenko. Okay, so that's where we are now. Well, here's the latest. Oh, and by the way, when Rory came out and said, I'm going to make the deputy manager of the port investigate this and do justice. When that came out, the governor was asked, well, what should happen here? And she said, oh, it should run its course through the course in the Civil Service Commission. She was happy with that. But the lieutenant governor said, no, I understand they've got a group down there looking at this, and what we're really interested in is fairness. So there's a little fracture there in the front office. Now, the latest thing that happened appeared in the Post on Saturday. And here's what it said. The Port Authority of Guam management has expressed a desire to settle the cases of a group of Port Authority employees who were fired more than 6 years ago, an attorney representing one of the fired workers said on Thursday. Attorney Curtis Vandeveld appeared before the commission for a status conference on Thursday with his client, Leonora Leon Guerrero. Vandeveld told commissioners there has been some expression or desire to settle by the port. General Manager Rory Respicio. My client has communicated information to the port general manager for the purpose of negotiating a settlement. So counsel for one of the seven says Rory wants to settle. The attorney asked the commission to delay another hearing on the matter for 90 days. So he didn't want to go forward with the case, saying he didn't want to aggressively move forward with the matter because it would accelerate the attorney's fees and, in his belief, impede efforts to negotiate a settlement. Nothing has yet come to fruition, but there has been some further expression or desire to negotiate a settlement, Vandeveld said. But the information came to as news to Port Authority Legal Counsel Darlene Hitton, who responded to Vandeveld's assertions and objected to the proposed 90-day delay. The previous agency management fought for the termination to stand. And here's a quote: "We have not received any direction that the port is going to settle this matter or that the board has agreed that this matter is going to settle," Hitton said. "We are ready to move on to hearing on the merits." So that's pretty heavy duty. So, oh yeah, and something I forgot to mention. Well, there's one other kind of interesting item here that I forgot to mention that I'll pick up right after the seventh inning stretch. And I don't notice that Jack Haddock is suited up for the game today, so no tall tale Tigers for Jack.
The GCC Votech Class of 79 is back. Join them on April 27th at the Onward Beach Hotel for a night of dinner, dancing, skits, and reminiscing. It's been 40 years since graduation, so take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime chance to relive the memories. There's also a memorial mass on Friday, the 26th, at the Santa Teresita Church. Be there at 5:30 for candle placement in honor of classmates who've gone before. Tickets for the reunion on the 27th are on sale for $40 a person. For details, find Connie Kittigwa St. Nicholas at 488-6108 or Kathy Diaz, 777-3243. Be-Bus 79ers.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training every morning on The Ray Gibson Show.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
There was an easy ground ball hit about 7 feet to the right of first base. Should have been an easy out, but it rolled all the way to the wall in right field. You know why, Real Joe Cruz?
Because Jack Haddock didn't suit up.
He did not suit up, and he was not out there at first base.
It's not what he did, sir. It's what he didn't do.
What he didn't do. Where is Sherlock Holmes when we really need him? All right. So back to Menogate. One of the things I forgot to mention was that after Bernadette Meno was fired at the port, she was hired by Rory Respicio to work in his senatorial office. So it just seems that Rory Respicio takes an awful lot of interest in this, especially after he was kind of chastised by his board, and after his governor had told him, let the case run its course. Now, this is the same Rory Respicio who was chastised by the board for contacting Champ Calvo who is one of the principals and also counsel for YTK, to enter into mediation concerning the YTK matter. His board told him in no uncertain terms, you don't do that. If we're going to mediate, it's got to come from the board, not from you. So I'm going to take a little break here from Menogate and go to another columnist, one of my favorite columnists, appears in the Post. It's good afternoon, Ellen.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
Real good. Yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. I was calling to update you on our efforts to promote the movie Unplanned and to support the new pregnancy center that will be opening, Safe Haven. When I called last week, a couple weeks ago, we were working on a special event for this coming Thursday night on the 28th. We have succeeded in selling out the house at Micro Mall, so we're going to have 280 people stuffed in a theater to watch this movie. And then we have now available fundraising tickets that people can purchase and support the pregnancy center, but go to any show during the 2 to 3 weeks that the show will be here.
Okay, Ellen, where can I buy one of those tickets?
Over at Facebook store.
That's right, Facebook store. And refresh my recollection again as to where Facebook store is.
Where the new Koa Market used to be. Remember, we talked about that.
Right. Yeah, but I'm beginning to remember, but I suspect that everybody out there in our international radio listening audience would want to know where they can buy those tickets. Now, is there any controversy about this movie at all, Helen?
Well, I'm going to wait to see what happens when it is released on Thursday. We had the first controversy of the movie getting an R rating, when really it's not an R-rated movie. It's a PG-13 movie. That's what the producers made. But because of there are 2 scenes involving abortions and 1 scene involving the treatment of a girl at the abortion clinic, they felt the reviewers and the people who rated decided it was too violent, so they put an R rating on it.
So that means that children under 18 couldn't attend the movie without their parents. Is that correct?
Well, if it's enforced, yes.
Now, what do you happen to know what the law of abortion is? Constitutional law of abortion. Could someone who's not 18 actually get an abortion?
Yes, and there are places in the States where a 15-year-old could get an abortion without a parent.
So if you're a 15-year-old pregnant female in some of the places in the States, you could get an abortion without the consent of your parents.
Right, but you can watch the movie.
But in the entire country, unless you're 18, you can't go to the movie by yourself.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you're listening earlier when I was talking about the left and the right, et cetera. I have a feeling where this animus, this anti-movie animus comes from, and I don't think it's from conservatives.
Oh, no, I don't think so. Not at all. So,
well, thanks a lot for.
We would encourage everything I've read, all of the reviews that I've been seeing say that this is, perfectly fine movie for like a 12-year-old, 11, 12-year-old. But one review said no little ones, because those, I guess, the abortion scenes are horrific enough that they would really disturb a little child.
Well, I can understand that, because just the concept of abortion by itself is somewhat horrific, even in the abstract, isn't it, Helen?
Well, yeah, but in reality, it's barbaric.
So maybe there's something to be gained by allowing young teenage girls to see the movie and understand what abortion is really all about. And it's not like it was originally described as, well, it's really not that complicated, and it's just a part of your body and that sort of thing, right?
Correct. This is the story of Abby Johnson, who was one of the youngest clinic directors in the history of Planned Parenthood, and her testimony is that she bought the line. She bought the whole line that she was supposed to say. It's tissue. a baby doesn't have any sensory feeling until 28 weeks. How ridiculous is that? When the baby's already kicking you at 16 weeks. And then when she actually saw it on the screen and watched it happen, that's when it just came upon her to realize this is totally wrong.
And I suppose that's one of the reasons that the pro-abortion folks would fight against any law that would require candidates for abortion to see an ultrasound screening of an abortion, right?
That's correct, and actually I just saw that South Dakota passed that kind of a law, that they were going to require an ultrasound before an abortion. And the one and only abortion provider in the state is fighting that.
Well, Helen, I really want to thank you for your efforts here and for calling us up and updating us on the first time that we could buy or actually find a seat would be on the 29th. Then is that correct?
Yes, on the 29th. 28th is you'd have to sit on somebody's lap, Bob.
It's already sold out. Okay, I'm going to see it, and I will mention it after I've seen it. Thank you very much, Helen.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, so much for that. I guess we could wrap up Menogate here. Mary Torres, I heard Mary Torres say on TV that if you really want to understand the Port 7 and the controversy, follow the money, she said, as though we were back to the days of Deep Throat and Richard Nixon. Follow the money. Well, there's a tremendous amount of money involved here because if, let's say, hypothetically, that all of the 7 were to get their jobs back tomorrow, if there were a settlement agreement that they got their jobs back together with back tomorrow with complete back pay, then every one of those people would receive back pay from the day they were fired down until the day that they were reinstated, less whatever money they made during the time that they were not in work. Millions of dollars potentially involved there. So I have been quite critical of the Civil Service Commission as the host of your Tall Tales program here. I think sometimes they make some really boneheaded decisions, but that's the way the system is designed. So we have a Civil Service Commission, we have a Superior Court, we have a Supreme Court, we have the rule of law. I would hope that these cases can run to conclusion and that they not be hijacked by an overzealous executive manager of the port who seems to be bound to get involved in these things one way or another, even when the board's own lawyer doesn't know about it. So I'm going to follow this very closely and attempt to keep you informed on what's going on. Okay, the next item on the card is Clint versus Congress. And this article arises from an article that appeared in the Post once again on Saturday. So Saturday's Post was a wealth of material for talk show hosts. And a subheading in this article, the article is entitled Recreational Marijuana Debate Paused, and then there's a subheading Federal Law and Local Law. The legislature's Legal Bureau addressed concerns initially raised by retired attorney Howard Trapp, who told the Guam Daily Post in February that any bill passed by the legislature to legalize marijuana for recreational use would violate the Organic Act of Guam. I remember that. And at the time I said, well, no surprise, Howard Trapp is right. Howard Trapp's a great legal mind. And we're fortunate to have someone of his caliber who will speak out on these issues. His meter's not running. Nobody was paying him to take this position. Trapp went on to say the 50 states are sovereign and they can do as they please, said Trapp. But all Guam law is an extension of federal law through the Organic Act, which specifically prohibits the enactment of any law that contradicts existing federal law. And then Rigel read the opinion of the legislature's legal bureau. Okay, now in the beginning of this part, I said the legislature's legal bureau addressed concerns about the legality of the bill. I don't know anybody named Legislative Legal Bureau. Do you, Real Joe Cruz?
No, I don't, sir.
I've never shook and howdied with Mr. Legislative Legal Bureau. And if I did, I wonder what I would call him. I wouldn't use his full name. Would I just call him Legislative or Ledge or... in other words, the Legislative Legal Bureau is not a person. And since it's not a person, it doesn't address concerns. If there is a lawyer in the Legislative Legal Bureau and he has written an opinion, I would hope that he would put his name to the bottom of the opinion. And when he does, certain obligations arise, certain ethical obligations arise, not to mention certain credibility obligations arise. So the fact that Clint is quoting an opinion from somebody named Legislative Legal Bureau and apparently hasn't made that opinion available to anybody, I haven't seen it. I'd really like to see it. I don't give it much weight at all.
Sounds legit, sir.
Say again?
Sounds legit.
The opinion sounds legit?
Yeah.
Rigel led the opinion of the Legislative Legal Bureau, which concluded, quote, Bill 3235 is arguably not preempted by the Federal Controlled Substances Act because Congress did not intend to occupy the entire field of controlled substance regulation. Thus, the bill probably constitutes a proper exercise of lawmaking authority and arguably does not violate the Organic Act. Probably, arguably, etc. There's one word that the opinion should have used. That's arguendo. You know, assuming arguendo. In other words, for the sake of argument. Well, I've talked about lawyers' toolboxes in the past, but let me review once again what's in a lawyer's toolbox. A lawyer, in his toolkit, will have a pair of dung-colored glasses, or maybe shucks-colored glasses, will allow the lawyer to look down the road 2 or 3 miles and see every bad thing that could happen. The lawyer would have a pocket calculator that has a logarithm in it that would tell you how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. A lawyer also has a satchel full of monkey wrenches in his toolkit, so when necessary, he can throw his monkey wrench into the works of whatever's going on. Now, Mary Torres is not a lawyer, but she certainly was adept with the monkey wrench at the confirmation of Danny Torres. So you've got the dung-colored glasses, the special calculator, the satchel full of monkey wrenches, and there's another item in a lawyer's toolkit that I've forgotten to mention, and that's a aerosol can of whipped cream. And here's how you use an aerosol can of whipped cream. If you step out on your front porch and you find that a dog has visited your front porch and has left what I will euphemistically refer to as his calling card, one of the alternatives that you have is you go get a shovel and shovel it up and dispose of it, right? The second alternative is to go inside, grab a aerosol can of whipped cream, and spray whipped cream over the top of it.
That makes it all better.
That makes it all better, yeah. So that's one of the tools that a lawyer has in his toolkit. So when I see words like probably and arguably, etc., I kind of sniff the odor of whipped cream there. But I can't really say because I haven't seen that editorial. I mean, that so-called legal opinion. So what I did was I kind of cheated. I went to the law books myself. And these are some of my findings here. There's no arguably here or probably. I'm going to tell you exactly what the law says and allow each of our international radio listening audience to determine himself whether Bill 3235 is contrary to the Organic Act and therefore illegal. We have Congress's Public Law 91-53. Section 102, item 24 of that statute says the term, quote, state means any state, territory, or possession of the United States, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Trust Territory of the Virgin of Pacific Islands, and Canal Zone. That's what state means. And I'll later on show you that the Controlled Substances Act is applicable in every state, even when we determine that at the time that the statute was passed, the Trust Territory and the Canal Zone were treated as states by the Congress. So when the Congress goes so far as to say the Trust Territory, the Canal Zone, etc., does it seem that the Congress had intended to occupy the entire field of controlled substance regulation? Then we go on a little bit. To item number, section 100, item 4. Local distribution and possession of controlled substances contribute to the swelling interstate traffic in such substances. Controlled substances manufactured and distributed intra-state, that means within a state, not interstate, but intrastate, cannot be differentiated from controlled substances manufactured and distributed interstate. So coming into the home stretch, I think I've got just enough time here to wrap this up. I will submit it to the jury of our international radio listening audience and wait your verdict tomorrow, right after we start down the home stretch.
Attention homeowners, if you don't have a solar energy system on your roof from Micronesia Renewable Energy, now is the time to get one. MRE solar energy systems now come with battery storage for zero money down. This means that your home will have power even when the island power isn't available, like during power outages or during and after storms. The inconvenience of not having power for your home is a thing of the past. Don't be left in the dark. Call 632-2613 for a free consultation. MRE, the smarter choice.
Here we are, heading down the home stretch. I'm going to wrap up this question here about the applicability of the Organic Act to the Controlled Substance statute. So, Section 100, item 4, 5, and 6 go to great lengths to tell you that interstate cultivation, etc., of marijuana affects interstate commerce. And that item 6, federal control of the intrastate incidence of the traffic in controlled substances is essential to the effective control of the interstate incidence of such traffic. Now, you with guys with long memories would remember when I talked about a case called Wickard versus Filburn, a 1942 case where the Supreme Court said, all you got to do is find that an activity affects commerce. Not that the activity takes place in interstate commerce, only that it affects commerce. And that's what this part of the statute does. Then we go on to Section 401. It shall be unlawful for any person knowingly or intentionally, one, to manufacture, distribute, or possess with intent to distribute, manufacture, or dispense a controlled substance. And then down to the next section. In the case of controlled substance in Schedule 1 or 2, penalties, which is a narcotic drug, such person shall be sentenced to a term of imprisonment of not more than 15 years, a fine of not more than $25,000, or both. So it's pretty clear that the Controlled Substances Act affects intrastate cultivation, etc., of marijuana. It's unlawful to manufacture, distribute, dispense, or possess with intent to manufacture, distribute, or dispense marijuana. That's what the statute says. And it's unlawful in any state and or in the United States. The term United States, when used in a geographic sense, means all places and waters, continental or insular, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So that's what it says. That's what the Controlled Substances Act says. Now let's take a peek at the Organic Act. Section 43, as you were 1423A of the Organic Act, power of the legislature. The legislature's power of Guam shall extend to all rightful subjects of legislation not inconsistent with the provisions of this chapter and the laws of the United States applicable to Guam. Well, I just showed you that the Controlled Substances Act, the marijuana illegalization, is applicable to Guam, no question about it. And then we have the oath of office that all 15 senators take that oath of office, real Joe Cruz?
I believe they did, sir.
Both men and women?
Both of them. They.
They, okay. Here's what the oath of office is. I solemnly swear in the presence of Almighty God that I will well and faithfully support the Constitution of the United States, the laws of the United States applicable to Guam, and the laws of Guam, and I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my duties as a member of the Guam legislature. So if they have sworn to support the laws of the United States applicable to Guam, how do they get around that oath that they took in the sponsorship of this bill?
There's a loophole somewhere, sir.
How about this one? Maybe they had their fingers crossed when they took the oath.
It's possible.
So it doesn't really count, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and as far as the governor's concerned, it's even clearer. Section 1422 of the Organic Act, and referring to the governor, now, excuse my use of pronouns here, this section refers to the governor, and it starts out, he shall be responsible. Now, somebody ought to rewrite the Organic Act, and with respect to the governor, it ought to say, they shall be responsible. They shall be responsible for the faithful execution of the laws of Guam and the laws of the United States applicable to the laws of Guam. So it's nice that that bureau gave you some cover, Clint, but I don't see how anyone can make a straight-faced argument that the H word is not applicable here. It's against the law of the United States. You took an oath to uphold the laws of the United States, and you introduced a law that directly in contravention of the United States. So the jury's instructions, do you agree with Bob? Yes or no? And we'll count all the yes votes tomorrow morning at the beginning of the program. Remind me of that, real Joe Cruz.
Okay, sir.
So that's the latest on, I think I titled this one, Clint versus the U.S. Congress. I got another really good one to talk about tomorrow. GPD versus Chartreuse. I think you're really going to find a lot about that. Thank you.